Welcome to Out with Dan, the podcast that spotlights and examines the voices of LGBTQ+ authors, characters, and our allies. Together, we lift our voices and we tell our stories. I'm Dan White. Join me as I chat with this week's author. Hello and welcome back to Out with Dan. Today I'm beyond excited to talk to SJ Rozan about the Railway Conspiracy. Welcome, SJ.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
I'm glad you're here.
I was so glad to meet you finally after all these years.
So for the audience, SJ and I have been friends on Facebook for a long time. And so I stalk her movements around New York because she's always going to these fabulous places. I'm like, oh, I've got to put that on my list for next time. And I'm always that person that comments on the strangest of things or craziest of things, because that's just who I am. So let me give the audience a little rundown. So SJ is an Edgar, Agatha, Anthony, Nero, Seamus, and Macavity award-winning author of nearing 100 short stories and 20 novels. So I do want to ask a little goofy question. When the universe was handing out talents, did you get in line twice or what? Also, you are or were an architect, is that right?
Yeah, that was my first profession. Yeah,
that's amazing. I thought, in making up questions, I said, well, I should probably just ask SJ, how did you go from being an architect to a writer? But I guess you construct things. So I guess your brain is wired for construction, so to speak.
Yeah, that is part of it. You start with a vaguer idea and make it more and more and more precise. It's an iterative process. Both design and writing are this kind of thing. You go back and go out again, go back and go farther. Yeah.
That's so amazing to me. I mean, one of the things I will compliment you, which I like to do, and maybe a little comparison, which I don't typically do. So I had Joe Reed, Parker Adams on about the lockbox, and he had a chapter that was a fight scene that took place on a yacht. And it was so beautifully orchestrated from beginning to end. And I just marveled at that. So you had several fight scenes in this book. I marveled at those as well. I mean, what a talent. So when you're writing a book or a short story, do you put the action in the first draft, or do you go back and add the action at a later time?
I have to answer that question two ways. I put it in right away. Generally, because you kind of have to know how your characters feel going in and coming out. However, in the Dee and Lau books that I write with John Shen-Yin Ni, we have a Kung Fu consultant, because neither John nor I knows Kung Fu, and it would have been the art that they would use. I used to do Taekwondo, and John does another art, but not Kung Fu. So we found a Kung Fu consultant who is just fabulous, and he sends me the choreography. This guy does this, and the other guy does this, And so, writing these books, I will write what they call in music the intro and the outro, and I'll say insert fight scene here, and I'll send that to Sifu Ko with a list of who is in the fight for the good guys and the bad guys, and who comes out in what condition. So the bad guys are all lying around on the floor. The good guys are all jumping out the window, whatever. So he can then do that. And he has said that when he choreographs these things, he uses some of his students, and he himself, Sifu, will play each part because he wants to, because they have different abilities, these different fighters. And so he wants to be each one, including, he says, the dog.
Yeah, I love that though, and that's one of the things, So this dog is mesmerizing, but I love the fact that you've almost humanized the dog, so which I love.
Yeah, the dog is devoted to her owner. and also understands who her friends are, and she will, and she's also an extremely talented doggy fighter.
Hmm.
She doesn't fight other dogs; it's not dog fights, but she knows where to attack a human. So what the hell, right?
That's right. That's right. I love it though. But the choreography, though, SJ, is so woven into the fabric of the entire book, which as I used the word earlier, it's mesmerizing. I mean, there's something about reading a fight scene that either works for me or doesn't work for
Yeah.
me, and partially because I'm not a fighter. I mean, I would be the one whimpering in the corner with his ass whipped. So I'm like, that's but I like a well choreographed story. I enjoy the read of that. So I, of course, get all excited to talk to authors and sometimes go in a very non-linear way. So how about give the audience an overview of what the Railway Conspiracy is about?
This is volume 2 of a projected series where Judge Dee, who was a real Chinese jurist from the Tang Dynasty, which started in the year 600, basically 600 to 900, and Judge Dee was real, and there were stories written about him, and he has become a kind of heroic, mythic Chinese figure because he was, in those days, Chinese jurists, Chinese judges did their own investigations. So you came to a judge and you say, that guy stole my cow. And he sends his people out, or he goes himself and he investigates who that guy is. Why would he steal the cow? What was he doing when the cow was stolen? All this. And he renders a decision. And if the guy stole the cow, they get the cow back, or he has to pay for it, and then there's punishment. This was all on the judge. And Judge D Renji, was known, or was said to have never not solved a case. All the cases that came to him, he solved, no matter how complicated they were. So Judge D, they wrote stories about him. And my sense is that the Judge D's stories bear the same relationship to the actual person as the Robin Hood stories do to Robin of Locksley, who was a real person and existed and resisted the bad guys, the Sheriff of Nottingham and all that. But all the things they say he did, probably he didn't do. I think that's true of Judge D. But by the time his legend was discovered in the West by Robert Van Gulik and written down in English, that is translated into English. So we have this collection of Judge D books, and he's very famous in China. And John Nee, my partner, decided that a thing to do would be to tell the history of modern China, which is little understood in the West, through a series of detective novels with Judge D and a lot of kung fu. And I thought, sign me up. And so Judge D does the investigation, acts as a sort of Sherlock Holmes, and his Watson is a Chinese writer by the name of Lao She, who really was in London in 1924. Now, all the places they're going to go after this, he probably wasn't, but he was in London. He wrote some good books. He was really funny, very famous in China until the Cultural Revolution, when he was suddenly the bad guys, and he was killed then. But then he's been rehabilitated, and now he's famous again. So he is the Watson to Dee's Holmes, as it were. And then Dee used to go around with some people who were his kind of posse, and so we have been adding those people, so he gets his whole posse up. Although the dog was not originally one of them. And so what happens in this book is they are investigating a crime that seems to involve one set of things, then turns out to involve another set of things. And it has to do with events, as the first one did, events in Chinese history. So the Railway Conspiracy was an actual thing. Probably it didn't have headquarters and ninjas and Cossacks in London, but it did involve people in London. So that that was a very long-winded explanation of
So perfectly executed though, and I expected nothing less. So it's 'cause I told SJ before we started recording that I just on the premise of it said in 1924, I thought it was going to be a little more about immigration, like the US was passing some laws in 1924 about immigration. And that's where I thought this was headed. And I guess in some way, I think perhaps a world view of Asia was very different in 1924 than maybe it is today, maybe not. But I think because we knew so much less about Asia 100 years ago than we do today. And I think it was just interesting, and it went in places I just didn't think it was going to go. And I liked that a lot. I mean, I like to be surprised. I don't like to be tricked. I love to be surprised. So, and you did something else that was really so cute. So you got a chance to make fun of yourself in the book through Mr. Lau.
Yes, Mr. Lau. In the books that he wrote, he takes a slightly priggish position about. He's a very good observer of things, but the character in each book who represents himself is a little out of it, is not quite on top of things, is earnest, but and can be righteous, but misses things. And that's a kind of narrator that I just really enjoyed taking on that role. And then, of course, there's it's a sort of Watson-y role, except that Watson didn't have as much of a sense of humor, and Watson was actually a little better. I mean, Watson was a doctor, so he had a thing that he did really well. Lau is a writer and a teacher of Chinese, so he's kind of a schmo, but Dee loves him, and they get along really well, and so he gets to be the awestruck observer as these things go on. He's always the last to know.
Well, and I think
half the time,
well, and I think Mr. Lau gives the audience a chance to see these fantastic dance choreographed scenes and from the sidelines, because Mr. Lau sees these things. Just like me, Lau might be in the corner being strangled, just because he took a second too long to react. And I think some of us, in life, sometimes the most obvious things pass right on by me, and I just, at this age, I just have to laugh. I'm like, oh, really? You didn't see that? Everyone else saw it, but you. But I was probably in my own little mind somewhere. So,
yeah, and that is exactly his situation. There's in his world, there's a lot of, oh, really?
Which I loved. And honestly, he, as you say, he takes a righteous stand so often, and he's very sure, and yet he misses the point half the time. So, but yet like Dee, I think the audience has to fall in love with Mr. Lau, because he's a gentle spirit by nature. And so I loved that. And I will say something that you did with Dee that isn't done with Sherlock Holmes. Dee actually sees better than Sherlock Holmes, in my estimation. And the reason I say that is because at the end of the book, there's a little twist, which I won't tell, but we see Dee's humanity in ways I just have never related to Sherlock Holmes in that way. I find that Sherlock Holmes is cold and he's a little metallic, whereas I think Dee actually sees life a lot clearer. And even though Dee is very sure of himself, I think there's that bit of humanity in him that made him just so delicious to read about.
Oh, I'm so glad you feel like that, because we really did want him to be not a machine. He can do all these incredible things. He can kind of basically speak many languages, and he can fly through the air. Not that he can fly, but his muscles and his kung fu are that good. And he can think way ahead of you, and he can cook. But
Which is never a bad thing.
but he also can fall in love, and can make mistakes, and can make decisions that seem like bad ones based on who his friends are and whom he cares about. And it is now, Conan Doyle never put Holmes in the position of having to do any of that, of having to choose his friends over justice. Once or twice he did choose to let a bad guy go, or something like that, after all, Watson, it's Christmas, that kind of thing. But
right.
but D is more human, I think, or at least we wanted him to look that way. And he will, as the series goes on, he will make some mistakes, and as he's done already. Of course, in that book, in the first book, he made some mistakes. In the second book, not a mistake to be had, but but we want the reader to kind of identify with him too.
I think you've accomplished that. I mean, I think that's just it. You get to identify with him. I don't want to bag on Sherlock Holmes too much, but I sort of feel as if that is sort of a I'm smarter than you type of idea in writing. And that's okay if that's what you want to bring. I mean, they're good books, but I like to be able to relate a little more to my characters. That's why I like Miss Marple better than Hercule Poirot. I mean, Poirot steps into a room and he knows the answer already. Miss Marple, it takes her, she has to think about it. She has to enjoy her process to get there. Both of them get to the right answer at the end of the book. It's just their process to getting there. I like, as a reader, to participate along with the characters in discovering how the onion opens.
Yeah. That's interesting. Also, Miss Marple is always relating the people in this crime to people she knows who might not even have committed a crime, but they did a thing for a reason that relates to these people in the crime. And Poirot, whom I love, but Poirot seems to have never, like, each time he steps into a room, it's brand new. He doesn't have an experience of life that he draws on, just a talent for detecting and an experience of detecting. But I love the way Miss Marple is always saying, yes, the butcher's boy, when he was 11, and everybody's going, oh, this dotty old lady, what is she talking about, the butcher's boy? And then it turns out that the situations are exactly analogous.
I have found in my life, to get a little spiritual, I have found that if each time I meet a new person that I've not met before, if in my mind I think, oh my gosh, they remind me of so-and-so, right off the bat, I'm never wrong, because there's a reason you draw that analogy. Yeah. And that is, of course, one of the things that I like about Miss Marple. So I do want to read two things, if I can find them here. I make all these notes and then I don't put them in any order. I'm certainly an organic writer and a pantser and not a plotter, because if I was a plotter, I'd have them in order. So,
well, I just look at the books behind me and you can tell.
When SJ came on today, I'm like, oh, she's in my dining room. Where is she at? But so I love that. So here are two little phrases that you wrote. Curl on his side like an overcooked shrimp. It was magical. And they filled the motor car. They didn't get in, they didn't step into, they filled it. So I'm wondering, do you have manuscripts of unpublished poetry somewhere in your apartment?
No, I am totally not a poet. There's so much important. There are so many important elements of poetry that I don't understand. But what I do, it's important to me that the words, how to say this? See, I'm talking about words. I don't know how to talk about words. The words are really important. The verbs, nouns, adjectives, adverbs, in that order. And so filling the motor car it seemed to me that in that situation, that's what they would do. They would just fill it right up. The overcooked shrimp, I don't even know where that came from, but I could just see this guy all curled up.
Well, and those two visions, that's probably not the right word, and now I'm struggling for my words, those two things that conjure up for me, I was like, I saw it just perfectly. I mean, that's the, everyone knows what a shrimp looks like. It's curled up. So, but I thought, you know what, here's something that you've put in. Now, I do want to ask this as well. Does that come during the first draft, or is that something you work on line edits?
No, that kind of thing comes during the first. The shrimp is the kind of thing that comes during the first draft. I either get an image or I don't. And I, ever since, luckily for me, at the beginning of my career, I read Chandler. And I thought, okay, if you have an image that isn't as good as these, don't use it. Do not try to out Chandler because it can't be done.
No.
So my images are kind of sparingly sprinkled throughout the book, but they are ones that I know are effective. The verbs, sometimes I might have said we climbed into the motor car, and then subsequent craft, I might have said, no, that's too climby. So I changed it. I often change weak verbs to stronger ones if I'm just going, but I am not a just get it all out and then fix it writer. I like to work well, as I said, iteratively, but I like to polish stuff as I go, not meaning that when I'm done, it is finished. That's it. I can send it in, but it's as close as it can be, because I find otherwise I get sloppy. If I'm I'll fix that verb later, then I'll fix that line of dialogue later, then I'll fix the entire dialogue later, and then the book is a mess. So I like to work as hard as I can as I go. So I don't know when that verb came in, but that's the kind of thing I like to make sure is right before I go on.
I mean, I'm very impressed. I just like that. And the reason I ask about poetry is your use of language is so descriptive. Even in the smallest of details is descriptive. And that, I mean, to me, it's as if you romanced me, the reader. And I like that.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, to me, all the elements of a book are equally important, and the setting is one of them. The descriptors of the setting. What I don't like is long descriptions. But when your character is in a place, I want you to be able to see the place. I want the reader to see the place. So I want 3 or 4 very specific things, and then the reader paints the rest of the picture just naturally, sort of connects the dots. So language really is very important to me. It is the tool. It's the only tool. It's as though I said that beautiful painting behind you. It's as though a painter didn't particularly care about colors. You can't not. That's what you have. That's all you have.
That's right.
And in writing, all we have is language and the way we use it. So it is really important to me. That's one of the reasons that I do love Chandler, is his use of language. And
and SJ, sorry to interrupt you, but if I can also say the correct way to use language, and that's important because people who listen to this podcast have heard me say this a million times already. If the sky is blue, that's all I need to know. I don't need 18 words to describe the color blue. I just need to know the sky was blue and move on. Give me those words somewhere else where they can mean something to me, not just words to fill up your 100,000 word count or whatever the word count is, because we've all read at some point in our life something that you think, holy cow, they were just looking to make a word count because this is just too much. But that's me, of course. a critic as well. So
Yeah.
but I feel like this has been a master class, and I get to sort of brag to the audience. I am taking a master class with you soon at ShortCon at leftcoastcrime.com. EastCoastCrime.com. Don't screw it up, Dan. EastCoastCrime.com. And it's called ShortCon, and it'll be in Alexandria, Virginia. Will you sort of give the audience what we might go over or what your role will be there?
Yeah, I will be doing, I believe, the morning session. And I love ShortCon because it's about writing short stories and it's only a day long. I think that's hilarious. But well, I'll be there the night before, which will be Noir at the Bar. And then I'll do the morning session, which will involve the attendees doing 3 exercises. And I will talk about the point of the exercises and the nature of the short story, how it's different from the novel, how what you need to do to write one. I will have a handout of some short stories I think everybody should read. Not most of them aren't crime, because
Okay.
the short story is a thing in itself. And that's basically, you know, we'll have questions and answers, but it'll be a hands-on kind of thing, because I assume that almost everybody coming is a writer, is a short story writer, and wants to write more or better short stories. And so I will have exercises that will hit on points. And I also want to talk a little bit about, well, about setting, but also about dialogue, accent, and dialect, and how to use those in a story, because it's often they're confused for each other, and I think that's a particular uh, point that it might be going a little too deep in one place, but I think it really needs to be seen. So.
Well, I'm looking forward to it. I have my pen, paper, and my computer, so I'm ready to rock and roll.
Yes, if you're planning to come, ladies and gentlemen, you will need something to write with, because we're doing exercises.
Yes, that's what I'm there for. So you also do a residency in Italy. Is that the right word for residency, or
It's a workshop.
workshop? Okay.
It is under the aegis of Art Workshop International, which has been going now for about 40 years. And we have a 2-week, we have two-week sessions. I do one of the sessions in Assisi. We are all in the same beautiful hotel. Everybody has a view out over the Umbrian Plain. And we run for, well, it's 14 days, but that includes arrival and departure. And then there's a 2-day break in the middle, which would be a weekend if it were on the weekend, but we start in the middle of the week. And it's you know, you bring your work, and we have we workshop. There are also artists and other writers and stuff there at the same time, and we workshop your work, and then you go walk around this gorgeous town, and then we all have dinner together. And people work kind of intensively, because you are in Italy. You don't have your kitchen annoying you in the back, and your kids, you know, you're there. Everything is taken care of, and you're there to work and to look at the art. And
I
it's
love
really, and Assisi is so peaceful. They talk about the peace of Assisi because of St. Francis, but it's so quiet and beautiful. And then you go up in the square and have your cappuccino, and it's great. So
I love it.
anybody wants to come to that, art workshop, intl.com. And, you know, just, it's still time to get in on it. It'll be July 1st to 14th. So, you know, you got time.
Sounds like heaven to me. I would love to say I'm in. I'll definitely be in for Alexandria, Virginia, and
Oh,
maybe put Italy on the calendar for next year. So
yeah, do that. Yeah.
that's wonderful. SJ, thank you so much for joining me. Again, her latest book is The Railway Conspiracy. It is so fantastic, and I enjoyed this very much.
Thank you, Dan. I did too. I'm so glad to be on your show.
Thank you. Hang on for me just a second. Welcome to Out with Dan, the podcast that spotlights and examines the voices of LGBTQ+ authors, characters, and our allies. Together, we lift our voices and we tell our stories. I'm Dan White. Join me as I chat with this week's author.